Today is October 7, 2015, and it is the last and greatest day of the Feast of Tabernacles. So let's thank our Heavenly Family and get into our subject. Heavenly Family, thank you so much. Hallelujah. Thank you for this last and great day. Thank you for the opportunity to come and to get a hold of the truth, to have the sayings of inspiration and the principles brought into our minds to remain. Heavenly Family, please help us to understand the gospel better in this meeting from what we do now. Help us to really gain knowledge in this next little while and guide us to what we should consider. We want to see your kingdom grow and finally encompass the whole earth, Heavenly Family. We know that this was your prayer, brother. We know that it's been your intention, Heavenly Family, to have us become one with you and one with each other, to experience that oneness and unity as you do, Heavenly Family. So we know that this is to be accomplished through the truth. We know that error is what has held us back. Lies and accounting them to be something has been the thing which has prevented your kingdom from growing. So Heavenly Family, please clear away every deception, expose every lie, and reveal to us the truth in new and fresh rays of light. Heavenly Family, we know that this is according to your will, and therefore we ask it with confidence, praising you, knowing that you are eager to set us free and to show us all the aspects of truth that we may walk according to it. Please put it in the hearts of all here to purpose it within themselves, to walk according to your ways. Thank you, Heavenly Family. Thank you for your guidance and for the ministration of the angels. Thank you, Father, Mother, in the name of your children, Branch. We ask all these things.
Amen.
Amen. All right. The last day of the feast. It's been a good feast so far. There's been a lot that I think that we've learned. And we have more yet to learn. And the other thing that I will mention is that, of course, as you've seen going through and studying Leviticus and discussing the principles, it's taken a while to address individual principles. And there's still a lot that we haven't gone through in Leviticus itself. I mean, we're still in the first chapter. And so we may end up picking this up and continuing on weekends going through Leviticus. Through at least some of the meetings. We'll pray about that and see what happens. But it'll be good for us to focus in and really seek to understand Leviticus and the priestly law in general. So we'll see where this goes, but we, of course, have more today to go through. Last night, there was a question that we ended with, and I'll kind of recap that, and then we can see if anyone has anything to share, either in relation specifically to this question or something that may have been studied in relation to the priestly law that you wanted to mention. So basically what we noticed in last night's meeting is that the descriptions of the ritual of the burnt offering of the animals from the herd and from the flock are different one from another. So both of those descriptions are in Leviticus chapter 1. The description of the burnt offering of an animal from the herd is in verses 3 to 9, and then verses 10 to 13 contain the description of the ritual of the burnt offering of the animal from the flock. And what we notice is that there are certain details that are included in one but not included in another. So, for instance, the second description, the description of the ritual of the burnt offering of the animal from the flock, mentions that the animal is to be slaughtered on the north side of the altar. That is something that is not mentioned in the first description, the description dealing with the animal from the herd. Likewise, the description dealing with the animal from the herd mentions that the person bringing the offering is to place his hand on the head of the offering. Also mentions that he is to skin the offering. And, those are some significant points and, a part to keep in mind. And those things are not mentioned in the second description dealing with the animal from the flock. So our question was, why are these differences here? More specifically, are we to understand that there's a difference in the description because there's a difference in the ritual itself? In other words, are we to understand that in the burnt offering of the animal from the flock, the offerer is not to lay his hand on the head of the animal and is not to skin the animal? Likewise, are we to understand that in the ritual of the burnt offering of the animal from the herd, it is not to be slain on the north side of the altar because that detail isn't there? So that's one option, that the difference in the description between these rituals is due to the fact that the rituals themselves were to be different. The other possibility is that the difference is there because the author of Leviticus is intending that we will understand that what is true in the one circumstance is true in the other. In other words, they're both burnt offerings, so you should understand that just because I'm not mentioning to skin it here, we already went over the fact that it's to be skinned with the animal from the herd, so you should know that it's supposed to be skinned with the animal from the flock. That's another possibility. So this is really important to find out because it changes how we look at the rituals themselves and how we understand what was done, and therefore that will greatly impact the antitypical meaning. I just want to highlight also that this is a great example to show how understanding how things worked in the type is prerequisite to understanding the antitype. Because if we just jump in here and start having antitypical ideas about what this might mean and haven't established things like this of whether the ritual is actually different or not, then we may be building something on a false foundation. So this is the groundwork. This is laying the foundation. It's an important and necessary part of even coming to understand the antitype. But those were the two different possibilities we were looking at, and that was the question. Is the difference because there's a difference in the ritual, or is the difference there because it's the intention of the author for us to already understand the different elements that are there as part of the burnt offering, and so there's no need to reference all the different details? So if someone would like to share what they have found in their investigation on that point, that would be great. Otherwise, if anyone has something that they wanted to mention in relation to the priestly law in general, something that you may have been studying from another text that relates to this whole thing, then you can feel free to share that as well. So I'll leave it open for you all now.
Okay, this is Norman. I guess since I left off last night with saying I'd found something. I should probably say what it was first. And
sounds good.
Also, I didn't. I found a couple of these things while you were talking last night, and I didn't want to interrupt you because I've read in the community rule if you interrupt someone while they're speaking, you could lose out on your next meal or even be put out of the camp. So I didn't want to interrupt you. Anyway, what I noticed was, of course, we'd already established in Leviticus 1 in the burnt offering, the bull was skinned. But if you look over in Leviticus 3 in the peace offering, which, by the way, is a male or a female out of the herd, it doesn't mention it being skinned. And then if you look in Leviticus 4, which is the sin offering, there again it doesn't mention it being skinned. However, yeah, a bullock. However, it doesn't mention it being skinned, but if you go down to verses 11 and 12 in Leviticus 4, it says the rest of the bull, including the skinned, are to be burned outside the camp. And also in Leviticus 3, it's basically the same thing. It's done as a sin offering in verses 20 and 21, and the skin and the rest of the bull are to be burned outside of the camp. And then so I got to looking around a little bit more, and in chapter 8, when this is about the anointing of the priest, it doesn't mention skinning it either, but it does mention it again that the skin or the hide was to be burned outside of the camp. So I, kind of got from all of that he was intending for everyone to know that, because I first showed you how to skin the bull, that this is what you do each time. And then I also found in Leviticus 7:8, when the priest was doing a burnt offering, he was given the skin. That wasn't burned up outside the camp. It was given to the priest. And also in Exodus 29:14, when Moses was originally explaining how to do everything, it was the same thing with the sin offering. It was burned outside of the camp. So that's what I kind of found out. And I think Carol may even have more on it.
Okay, that's really good. So the thought is, well, if it's mentioning that the skin is burned outside the camp in all these other circumstances, when the skin actually wasn't supposed to be taken for the priest, for instance, then why wouldn't it mention that in this circumstance with the burnt offering from the animal from the flock? And then Leviticus 7:8, that's one that I also had in my notes. It seems to just be speaking of burnt offerings in general and saying that the hide of the burnt offering belongs to the priest who offers it. So that's pretty interesting.
I also noticed, as Norman said, that the hide was burned. It seems that the hide is burned only when it's a sin offering. Is that pretty much what you got out of it, Norman?
Yes.
And a lot of the other parts, sometimes even the flesh, right?
Yeah. And the dung.
Yep. That would be actually the majority of the sacrifices burned outside the camp, wasn't it? On a sin offering.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, along those lines, that actually means that when somebody comes to Christ, there's just really not much of them that's acceptable, at that point. And that idea can be found in silver trumpet number 3. I hope I'm saying that. Am I conveying that idea, Trent, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying fairly well, and I think maybe others here do as well. Just that, when someone comes and they are full of sin, they are not wholly acceptable to God. So what is offered on the altar of burnt offering isn't the whole animal, as in the case of the burnt offering. With the sin offering or purification offering, it's just the fat and the kidneys, if I'm remembering correctly. Mm-hmm. Just the fat and the kidneys, and that's it. Everything else is taken and burned outside the camp.
The protruding lobe on the liver is also burned on the altar. Did you mention
right? No, but that's actually it's just fatty tissue. It's mentioned specifically, but it's part of the fat, and so that's part of it.
Same. Okay.
Yeah, and let me ask you guys, if anyone happens to know, where was the flesh and hide of the peace offering burnt?
Norman says outside the camp.
Outside the camp.
I may be taking that back. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I think it'll be good for us to notice, and we can do this later when we get there, but it'll be good to notice and to mark down what the differences are between the peace offering and the sin offering, because there are many similarities. It looks very similar in some ways, but there are also some differences.
I looked at the question like this. I was thinking, okay, the difference between the herd and the flock in terms of this particular question, as far as the details, and that were different, that were presented differently. So I was thinking, okay, well, and I was just looking at burnt offerings, okay, and I was thinking, okay, where else have we seen a burnt offering from the flock? And so I took a look at chapter 8 in Leviticus, and then also Exodus 29, and looked at that aspect. Although, knowing that it has a different purpose, possibly, there are some differences, but that there could be some similarities. That if we saw some generalizations about flock sacrifices versus herd sacrifices, that it might be helpful. So, I got out Silver Trumpet Volume 1, Number 3, and I was looking at that because it talks about the offerings for the priesthood. And so what I remembered was something that jumped out at me, and it was this. It was the idea that the animal represents something, some aspect of the person. And so, and I'm just going to read this little paragraph on page 19. It's the first full paragraph. By placing their hands on the ram, the soon-to-be priests were indicating that they were now to be represented by a new animal. Antitypically, after having one's sins taken away and the body of sin destroyed, one becomes a new creature, 2 Corinthians 5:17. This new creature is less lofty than the first, showing that a humbling had taken place. Though humbled, this new creature would be wholly acceptable, unlike the previous offering. So, in the burnt offering for the sanctification of the priesthood, not the sanctification, but the anointing of the priesthood, it actually, the only animal that could be used was a ram, because they were to bring 3 animals. They would bring a bullock and then 2 rams. And so in the peace offering the burnt offering for the priesthood, it was an animal from the flock. And so I made a little chart here, and, I put herd, flock, and then flock consecration. So the burnt offering of an animal from the flock for the consecration of the priesthood had its own section. And so in the herd, hand was placed on the head. Flock, just in general, from the first chapter of Leviticus, it didn't indicate that. But it did indicate that in both Exodus 29 and Leviticus 8, that the head hand was placed on the head. So that makes me think, well, then, it's possible that was just omitted because it was assumed, just a possibility. Okay, in all three instances, the blood was splashed. In the first two instances, the blood was splashed by the priesthood. In the third, the one that's for the consecration of the priesthood, it was done by Moses, of course, because there wasn't any priesthood yet. Officially, they were in the process of being consecrated. And then the herd animal was skinned by the presenter. The flock animal was not. And in the consecration, the flock animal was not. Okay, so the animal was cut into parts by the presenter for the herd.
Carol?
Yes.
Just wanted to quickly interrupt and ask here. When you say for the flock it was not, and in the consecration rituals it was not, by that do you mean that it actually in reality wasn't, or do you just mean that it wasn't mentioned in the description?
It was not mentioned in the description.
Okay, just wanted to have that point clear.
Okay, and, we have two witnesses for the consecration because, we have Exodus 29 and Leviticus 8. Exodus 29 being the prescription and then Leviticus 8 being the description, just to mention that. And then, it was cut in parts by the presenter in the instance for the herd, and it was told to be cut into parts by the presenter in the herd instance and the flock instance, and by Moses in the one for the consecration. And then fire was put on the altar, and the wood was arranged by the priests for the herd, priests for the flock, and it was told to be done by Moses in the consecration with the flock. And then the parts were told to be arranged in the herd offering, the parts and the head and the suet by the priest. In the flock burnt offering, parts and head and suet by the priests. In the flock consecration offering, it was the head, the parts, and the suet, but the legs were washed and the entrails were washed. And, in that issue of the silver trumpet that I mentioned, it goes into, those aspects having to do with, that the legs and the entrails, that these things had been washed, and now that it was, completely usable by our heavenly family. And then, let's see. Okay, so then the very next thing was what was offered. And in the herd instance, it was said that all of the animal would be offered by the priests. In the flock instance, all would be offered by the priests. And in the flock and the consecration, that all would be offered by Moses. So, anyway, that's what I noticed about that. And, since the herd animal being indicative of the person who is coming to Christ, and they are accepting justification by faith, then that skin has to be, burned outside the camp because it's not acceptable. Parts of the animal that aren't acceptable. With the flock, it not having been mentioned that it was skinned, and that representing, a different animal, so it would be a different person, a different state of that person, if that makes any sense at all, as a possibility, for possibly explaining why, it wasn't. Why it wasn't skinned and the skin discarded outside the camp. That's just a possibility. And that's all I had.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's that's a good way to go about things, to look at other instances that describe burnt offerings from the flock and to see, okay, well, is there, as part of this description, anything which would indicate that they did do the parts that are left out of the description? So, for that example, there you have the consecration of the priesthood and the sacrifices done as part of that. And there is actually a burnt offering from the flock. And there it does mention that they place their hands on the head of it, which leans in the direction of, this being something that was assumed that should be done for these rituals, even though it wasn't specifically mentioned. So that's definitely part of it. And then all the other things that you mentioned, Carol, I think it's really good taking things and putting them, in different columns or whatever, however you did it, making a little chart or a table, and really comparing. That is, basically giving yourself a really good opportunity to understand it a lot more clearly. So that's excellent. Were there any other comments on this issue?
I had a thought that where it said to come to the north side, if we understand what the north side means or why they're coming to the north side, that would help on the other understanding the other ones.
Sure, yeah. It's definitely coming to understand what that aspect means is important, since that is a large part of the sacrificial service. And actually,
go
ahead.
Also, the part about laying your hand on the head, what does that actually mean or symbolize? So that would help understanding the other ones.
Certainly. Although, of course, it is, it's important to understand in what circumstances that was done, and if that's something that was done all the time or just when it mentions it. And so, going through this whole aspect to just see how it worked in the type will actually lead us to understand the antitypical significance of these things. And actually, on the first point that you mentioned there, I wanted to expand a little bit on that with the north side of the altar. There are a number of other places throughout Leviticus that make a statement that has relation to this. And again, we're looking to see with these two different descriptions, one being the description of the ritual of the burnt offering of the animal from the herd, and the other being the burnt offering of the animal from the flock. Now, it's only in the second one, the animal from the flock, that it mentions the north side of the altar. But then later in Leviticus, in a number of places, it refers to slaughtering an animal in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered before the Lord. And I'll mention some examples of that. Leviticus 4:24 says, he must lay his hand on the head of the male goat and slaughter it in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered before the Lord. It is a sin offering. And Leviticus 4, verse 29, it says, he must lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter the sin offering in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. And then verse 33 says, he must lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it for sin offering in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. And then also chapter 6, verse 25 says something very similar. And it's this recurring phrase of slaughtering it in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. Well, it's speaking there of the burnt offering just in general, implying that burnt offerings were all slaughtered in the same place. If you had it so that the burnt offering of the animal from the herd was slaughtered in a different place from the burnt offering of the animal from the flock, then simply saying slaughter in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered wouldn't actually help. It would be confusing because you would say, well, which burnt offering? Is it from the herd or from the flock? And so these verses later in Leviticus are assuming that the burnt offering, whether from the herd or from the flock, it's going to be slaughtered in the same place. And so in that case, reading about slaughtering the animal on the north side of the altar, as spoken of in Leviticus 1, verse 10, referring to the animal from the flock, then later in Leviticus, it is assuming that we will automatically apply that to being the same place where the animal from the herd is slaughtered. And so that also leans in that same direction. So just to recap some of that, we have for skinning the animal, in Leviticus 7, verse 8, it just simply states that the priest who presents someone's burnt offering, the hide of that burnt offering belongs to him. In other words, it belongs to that priest who presented it. Now that just kind of makes it as a blank statement. That seems to encompass not just the burnt offering from the herd, just burnt offerings. And Norman had also mentioned how, you read Leviticus 3 and 4, where it talks about the peace offering and the sin offering, and in those instances, it also leaves out any mention of skinning the animal, but it says that the skin of the animal was to be burnt outside the camp along with its meat and all these other things. And also there's a place in Exodus that had that same description. So the question is, well, in that case, if that was the same circumstance dealing with the burnt offering of the animal from the flock, why didn't it mention its skin being burnt somewhere, as it does with the other instances? So putting that together with Leviticus 7:8 seems to imply that we are to understand that it was to be skinned and that the hide would go to the priest who officiated the ritual. And then we have the issue of placing hands on the head, and we can see that there are examples elsewhere in Leviticus of people offering a burnt animal from the flock, and they lay their hand on the head, even though that's not mentioned in Leviticus 1, verses 10 to 13. So it seems to be assuming that that's part of the ritual of the animal from the flock, even though it wasn't specifically mentioned. And then we have the slaughtering of the animal on the north side of the altar, and what we see is that later in Leviticus, such as Leviticus chapter 4, verse 24, 29, and 33, it assumes that all the burnt offerings are slaughtered in the same place, and really kind of pretty well disallows for the idea that they were slaughtered in different places. Otherwise, it wouldn't simply say to slaughter it in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. It would have to specify which burnt offering or specify where in some other means if they were truly slaughtered in two different places. So that also indicates that it is to be understood as just leaving out the details because the author intends us to already understand that that is just how burnt offerings are done. So that's kind of a summary of what we've gone through so far. Does anyone have anything in addition to add to that, or anything that might seem to conflict with that?
I have one thing. It doesn't necessarily conflict with it, but all of the offerings that were burnt on the altar, like, the fat and the entrails and all of these things, it always says that they were a sweet savor to the Lord, or an odor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got to thinking about that. And I think even Teresa mentioned earlier, the smell of the meat and stuff, that smells good. But I've had the experience before of being around when they branded cattle, and when they put that brand on the hide of that cow, it stinks. And so I was just, thinking, well, maybe that's one reason why that skin was taken outside of the camp and burned, because it wasn't a sweet odor to the Lord. And then it probably represents something also, I would imagine. Just a thought.
Oh, I think that's a fair thought for sure, because evidently, according to these different rituals, smell was an important part.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's good to have our eyes open for that sort of thing.
And since you bring it up, the question arises in my mind, well, was it the skin or was it the hair on the skin? Because if you've ever burned hair, that smells really bad. But I personally haven't smelled skin burning and like without any hair on it, to be able to say for sure if skin without hair has a bad odor. My thoughts go to, well, chickens don't have hair, they have feathers, so maybe it's a completely different comparison, but a lot of chicken meat still has skin on it, and people cook it.
Well, if the smell of human skin burning resembles that of animal skin, which I would think it would probably be close, I can attest that human skin smells bad.
Yeah, me too. I've smelled that.
Yeah, because I had a couple of skin cancers. I had a surgery on a finger and a couple of skin cancers that were cauterized, and it has a hard to describe. There's a smell that smells like it. But it's not a savory. It's not a pleasing aroma. It's not as bad as hair, though. You're right. Hair really stinks.
But when you're dealing with animals with fur, it's pretty impossible to remove the fur from the skin in it, because it's so embedded. Like almost the entire skin is embedded, where it is literally. I mean, if you ever take a look at a cow skin, all right, just cut 1 inch square off of it, and see every is a hair follicle, like to the point where it's taken over. So it's impossible to separate that. So it could be understandable, like Brother had said earlier, that the skin in itself, because it is so embedded or so part of, that it is, the hair is still part of it. And that's why the smell smells as it does in comparison to the flesh, right, that does not have the hair as part of it. All the skin always have the hair as part of it. almost virtually impossible. Even if you burn the top part of the hair off, the follicles is still in there, so that even if you're burning the skin, it's still going to have the hair follicles below the surface of the skin. So it cannot be removed. It cannot be separated. So therefore, if you burn the skin, you're burning the hair, and so no matter what, you're going to have that odor that is not the same as if you're burning the flesh. So that's probably one of the reasons when you're looking at the fact that the savor. And I go back when I listened to once when Jacob, when his sons did what they did because of the man who wanted to touch Dinah, their daughter, and one of the things he had said is that you have made me to stink among the nations, and so a symbolic aspect of a great sin is a stink, an odor, a bad odor. And so you always see the difference where God says it's a savor to me, a savory odor to me, a sweet swelling odor to me, and or he goes or he'll say they're a stink, or they're a stink among, or you've been a stink. And so it was a very, very important thing, as it was said earlier, in regards to the smell. So the skin issue with the hair in it and can't be separated and has to be burnt together may also represent that sin, that stink part of things. Just a thought.
No, I think it's a good thought.
Yeah, no, it's something I'd like to add to that whole discussion of, burning of hair and skin. It's quite interesting how at the end of a Nazirite vow, when the Nazirite is going and doing his concluding sacrifices, to end the Nazirite vow, it wasn't just, well, now you're done. No, you brought certain sacrifices, and there was offerings that had to take place. And in Numbers chapter 6, verse 18, this is an interesting detail that it records. It says, "Then the Nazirite must shave his consecrated head at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and must take the hair from his consecrated head and put it on the fire where the peace offering is burning," which we know, of course, is on the altar of burnt offering. So there you have human hair being burned on the altar, which is really interesting because, of course, hair doesn't smell good, but it's being burned on a peace offering. And another thing that I will mention here that is a peculiarity of this verse is that here you have the only time that I'm aware of, and this is good for people to investigate more, but this is the only place that I'm aware of where it describes someone who is not a priest interacting with the altar of burnt offering as part of a ritual. We've noticed that doesn't really happen as we've been reading, but here we have a Nazirite who is actually putting something on the altar. So that's something to investigate. And, of course, the aspect of hair burning, how that might relate to the issue of smell and burning things on the altar of burnt offering. I can't say for sure. I don't know all the different details of that, but it's something to account for when learning the principles of the priestly law.
In regards to what you're saying, Trent, in regards to the hair, the Nazirite taking the hair, wasn't the shaving a sign of symbolic of humbling? Remember when they shaved David's men and sent him back? It was a humbling experience, and he said it made him sit away for 6 months till the hair grew back. All right, It was quite interesting that they weren't even allowed. They didn't even go in public, while they were, and it was a shameful thing. So the removing of the hair in itself is a sign of humbleness, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then when you take that hair, which is supposed to be your beauty or supposed to be that part of you as a Nazirite, and you take it and you put it on the altar, okay, these are just questions and just thoughts as you're saying it. Isn't that maybe representative of taking away your beauty or taking away your pride or humbling yourself, that you're burning up your pride or burning up, right, which in itself will become a sweet savor to the Lord, though the smell at that particular point might be stink, but yet in the ritual aspect of it?
Well, I think in order to answer that question, we have to find what it means to burn something on the altar of burnt offering, right, as opposed to something else. Because, burning it, in our minds, the first thought is it's kind of like almost like getting rid of it or having it consumed so that it's no longer. But that might not necessarily be the meaning of it, in that what you have is, when you look at the different offerings, like the burnt offering is wholly acceptable to the Lord, therefore it can be burnt, whereas something like a sin offering isn't wholly acceptable, only a part of it can be burnt, and the rest of it has to be burnt somewhere else. It's all burnt, but it has to be burnt somewhere else. So in order to really understand, why is it that he's doing it and burning it in that place as opposed to somewhere else, I think we have to understand a little bit more about the altar of burnt offering itself and the symbolism of burning something there. And I can't answer that fully right now, but I think that's kind of the direction that we would have to go in. And it's a really good question, though. So I look forward to learning about it.
Noticed a couple of times where a greasy pile of ashes was mentioned. One was the outside the camp where the skin was burned, and another time was in relation to the feathers that were removed from the bird.
Right, the place of fatty ashes. That's something to investigate as well. There's questions in relation to that we should search out the answers to. There was something Teresa wanted to mention as well.
Yes, I just wanted to expand a little bit more on why I mentioned the potential difference or whatever about the smell of hair burning versus the smell of skin, and wondering if there's any significance. And what I was going to try to get to was that we know that in symbolism in Scripture, there's a specification of hair having symbolic meaning different from the symbolism of skin, and how skin is a symbol of self-righteousness. Well, depending on whose skin it is. But, character, skin being a symbol of character, and hair being a symbol of, Michael mentioned beauty, but I'm more familiar with it being a symbol of strength. And so you have the aspects of beauty and strength. So I just wanted to mention that in case it would be helpful to be keeping in mind as we're reading what is taking place in these ritual ceremonies, how, we might be thinking of the skin strictly being the hide of the animal being removed from the body, which would imply that it still has all the hair on it. And maybe that is exactly what's happening. We also have, for me at this point, I still have to consider that there's a possibility that there's a distinction between the symbolism of the hair on the hide and the hide and the skin itself. Now, I'm not saying that there is, obviously, but, since they have different symbolisms, I thought that might be significant.
Yeah, it's good to keep in mind and keep as part of the investigation and see if there's times where it distinguishes. I mean, obviously, in some instances, the Nazarite thing is kind of a different thing because that's the hair of a human, but you have that given as a specific symbol, and then you'll have the hide of an animal. So does anyone else have any thoughts or comments in relation to this question of the difference in the description between the burnt offering of the animal from the herd and the burnt offering of the animal from the flock?
I think that was brought up, which I think it was Brother Leroy brought up the issue of the north. And I guess the significance in the issue of the north as to why particularly the north was always being mentioned. Yeah, so that was just one other thing here, and I was just sitting there trying to search on the north side of the altar. It says on the north side of the altar before the Lord, the sons of Aaron, and then goes. That's a lot. That's the only. So we already know that the north side, according to the scriptures, symbolize where the throne of God is. So why not the east side where the gate entrance is, right? So I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more. So why it is so particular that it has to be the north side in which this thing was done?
Well, I'll ask a question for anyone to answer, and the question is, does north always represent the throne of God or the place of the throne of God?
Well, could I read Isaiah chapter 14? And I did a search, just searching around, just in regards to the north, and it says, chapter 14, verse 13, it begins, is, for thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the cloud. I will be like the Most High. And then he goes on to say, when you were brought down and so forth like that. So it's just interesting. It says sit also up on the mount of the congregation. And the mount of the congregation is in the north. But yet in the same breath, it doesn't more say the throne. So I guess we'll have to find out what the mount of the congregation is in regards to that aspect to actually find out whether or not the throne of God is so much in the north. Or his throne is in the north. Mm-hmm. But
sure.
Yeah, but you know what he says, Anna just point that out. Says he sits upon the mount, which is, he's trying to replace God's throne. So which then obviously, okay.
Yeah, and the congregation, mount of the congregation, that's talking about the divine council where right. God sits on his throne. So that right there is a fairly clear reference to right. God's throne being in the north, and that's all good. But here's the question, is that all that north ever represents in Scripture, or is there anything else? Because if there's more than one meaning, then we can't automatically apply one thing that is giving the meaning of north to this circumstance. So can anyone think of anything else? Or if you can just mention whether there is any other meaning to north in Scripture.
Israel was to the north of Judah, where God's place of worship was, and they were rising up against they were doing things their own way.
Okay, so that's another example of something in the north, and there's times where there's a reference to those in the north and so on, and it's talking about the apostate kingdom of Israel. Anything else?
The king of the north.
The king of the north and the north country. North being as a general symbol for Babylon or sometimes even Assyria. And so, yeah, that's another good example. So the reason why I wanted to mention just a couple other things, or have people mention a couple other things, is because there's a number of indications of different meanings of the idea of the north in Scripture, and we have to understand which meaning is applicable in a given context. And it's different depending on the context. In the sanctuary, one of the things is that there's multiple things that are in the north. So when it comes to the temple especially, you have the northern gate, and you have the northern side of the altar, and you have the table of showbread on the north in the holy place. You have all these things, but they all don't represent the exact same thing. They have differences, and how do you determine those differences? Also in the sanctuary, you have the throne actually being on the western most point of the sanctuary. So that's something to have in consideration, like, okay, well, what's that about? And keep in mind, all of that, though, I'm not saying any of that to say that the idea of the throne of God is not applicable here. I'm not saying that one way or the other. I personally don't know one way or the other. But these are some of the reasons why I don't know. Because there's more to the picture that needs to be understood before we can really even know. And so, coming to a fuller understanding of how the ceremonial system worked in type and how the sanctuary was set up. And another thing that I'll mention is that there's, in Adventism, there's a lot of common teaching about the sanctuary and the furniture of the sanctuary, and people apply things as, oh, well, the courtyard is justification, and the holy place is sanctification, and the most holy place is glorification. And they have these different applications, and, saying that certain pieces of furniture are representative of the throne of God, or this thing or that thing, when none of those interpretations of the sanctuary came through inspiration. When Adventists today, when they talk about the sanctuary, so often that's what it is that they're referring to, when that's not the sanctuary truth that Ellen White and the pioneers were teaching. No, they were teaching about the investigative judgment and so on and so forth. And so the common interpretations in Adventism basically are doomed to not really be true. And so when we are investigating these things, we're having to come from a totally fresh perspective and to really examine things, gaining a knowledge of the principles involved, as Ellen White spoke of, and moving forward piece by piece, getting a comprehensive knowledge. So, were there any other thoughts or comments in relation to, again, either this aspect that we were looking at or in relation to the priestly law in general?
One thing that, just sort of going back to the issue of the north,
Yeah.
The whole idea concept is probably, from this KJV, without I haven't gone into the NET yet, there's 125 times that the word north is inside of the Bible. So I guess it's just a matter of going through. Because in just skipping through it, I found some very interesting things being said. One being in Job, and just very interesting statement. And but I guess it's a matter of going through that and taking all those very words, verses into context, and looking at it to try and come to some conclusion of the weight of the evidence given at this particular point. Come to a conclusion as to trying to understand what the North is symbolizing in particular those times.
Yeah, that's definitely a good part of the investigation there, to look up everywhere that it refers to North throughout Scripture, and both in the Protestant canon and in the other writings as well, and to see generally, what are some of the basic ideas attached to North, and then so that's one really good part of it. And then another part, which is a necessary part, is seeing what that is specifically in the context of the sanctuary. And sometimes there may be things that might not be referred to as, using the word North, but might just be part of the setup of the sanctuary, or done at a certain place which is north of something else, or, there's many different possibilities with that. But understanding basically what the altar itself is and what was done there, different things like that, will all help to inform what this means in the antitype.
We want the truth.
We want the truth. Amen.
That's what we could ask people, too. Do you want the truth, or do you want the lie?
And most people, hopefully, would say that they want the truth. So we need to learn it ourselves so that we can share it with others in the way that will help them the most. So any other comments?
And what difference it makes whether we have the truth or the lie.
Yeah. No, that's important for people to see, because sometimes people are self-deceived to think that they don't care about truth. But if they can be shown what a difference it makes, then maybe they will realize that they actually do care.
Because most people, they're not thinking of it in terms of the truth versus the lie. If you ask them if they thought they had the truth, then most people would say yes. Oh, not everybody, obviously, but a lot of people would say, yeah, I have the truth. And even though they may not even understand whatever doctrine they hold to fully, they still wouldn't think, oh, well, I have lies mixed in with it. Nobody really thinks of it like that, except for those of us who are, talking about it in those terms. But that's the thing. Most people, they don't even realize that if they have anything that isn't fully the truth, that it actually is a lie. They just think that it's not that important. Speaking from experience, I know that was my situation. It didn't necessarily mean that I had lies. It just meant that I didn't have all the truth. That's how I used to look at it.
So, to get a grasp of the direction that we should go in now, I just wanted to ask one more time maybe if people had anything that they wanted to share in relation to all of this. And if not, we could take a look at the next aspect of the of rituals in Leviticus chapter 1. So anyone have anything they wanted to add before we do that? Okay.
Sometime we need to talk about how do we show somebody the importance of having the truth. Like yesterday, I talked to a lady in the grocery store, and I offered her 8 natural laws. She says, "I'm Catholic." She didn't want to take anything. She says, and I says, "Yeah, God has lots of people in the Catholic Church." And she says, "Some people like our church because we have a pope."
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just coming to understand the truth thoroughly ourselves, and then really listening to people to see who they are, where they are at, and that will guide you to be able to know what to share with who, when, and, because here's the thing, some people might already have it as a very important thing in their minds to find the truth. And so with them, you won't have to know how to try and show them that the truth is important. They already know. Others might not think that the truth is that important and might not really be on any sort of pursuit. And so you'd have to see where they're at, and then you could find, through talking to them, what is, their focus. And you can kind of go from there to lead them to the truth. But that takes, it's hard to really say anything specific as to that, because each person, there's as many different ways to respond as there are situations that a person might have in their life. And so it really comes down to just having the principles thoroughly ingrained in your own mind, and having the aim and the purpose, having it as your primary goal to bring people to the opportunity to receive justification by faith. And in that, our Heavenly Family will guide to show, again, what to say, when, and so on. With some people, if they express no interest in the truth, there's often nothing that can be done for them at that moment in a direct way. At that point, inviting them to have a Bible study or giving them literature or anything like that, if they've already expressed that they're not interested, then that probably won't help them at all. They must be approached in a different sort of way. So very much depends on circumstances, and the only way that we will be able to meet every circumstance the way Christ did is to come to understand the principles by which He operated. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Question.
Sure.
Since we will be having another meeting tonight, are we going to be going on much longer? And if we are, would it be a good idea to take a break?
Sure. Okay, sure. So we'll take a break then. Let's say 10-minute break, and so we'll go at 35. Just 5 minutes after.
Okay.
So we're going to take a break for 15. You're thinking about 13 minutes?
Maybe. Let's just be back at
20 till?
Yeah, 20 till the next hour in whatever time zone you're in.
Great.
See you in a few minutes.